Delilah Vaughn had seen her fair share of awkward dates in the cozy little bistro where she worked, but this one took the cake. The man sitting at table 5 was tall, broad-shouldered, and unfairly handsome, but he looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. His date, a woman with perfectly styled blonde curls, was talking non-stop, barely pausing to breathe. I just think a man should be ambitious, you know? Like, I could never date someone who doesn't have a 5-year plan. Do you have a 5-year plan? She asked, twirling her wine glass between her fingers as she stared at him expectantly. The man who had introduced himself as Callum cleared his throat and gave her a polite, tight-lipped smile. I suppose I do. Delilah could tell he was dying inside. She had developed a sixth sense for these things after years of waitressing. Some dates were promising, others were disasters, and this was a slow-motion train wreck. As she refilled their water glasses, Callum caught her eye. His expression was desperate, like he was silently screaming for help. Delilah hesitated for half a second before making a split-second decision. "Oh, there you are," she gasped dramatically, placing a hand on Callum's shoulder. He tensed under her touch, his dark eyes widening in surprise. "I've been looking for you everywhere." The blonde woman scowled. "Excuse me." Delilah turned to her, giving her an apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but he was supposed to meet me here an hour ago. I thought maybe he got caught up, but—" "Well, I guess now I know why." She let her voice waver slightly, as if she were on the verge of tears. Callum caught on quickly. He straightened in his seat, looking at Delilah as if she were the answer to all his problems. "I completely lost track of time," he said, his voice smooth but laced with amusement. "I never meant to stand you up," the other woman scoffed, grabbing her purse. "Wow, unbelievable. You could have just said you weren't interested instead of wasting my time." She shot Callum a look of pure disdain before storming out of the restaurant. As soon as the door swung shut behind her, Callum let out a breath and turned to Delilah, his lips twitching. "That was impressive," she grinned. "You looked like you needed saving." "I did," he admitted, running a hand through his thick dark hair. "I owe you one," Delilah shrugged. "You can repay me by ordering something, so my boss doesn't think I'm just out here disrupting people's dates for fun." He chuckled, the sound deep and rich. "Fair enough. What do you recommend?" She tilted her head, studying him. "You seem like a steak kind of guy." "Good guess." He leaned back in his chair, looking at her with interest. "Join me," she blinked, caught off guard. I can't." "I'm working." "Take a break," he suggested smoothly, nodding toward her manager, who was watching the interaction with amusement. "I'm sure he won't mind." Delilah turned to see her boss giving her a knowing nod. With a laugh, she slid into the seat across from Callum. "This is probably the strangest way I've ever met someone," she admitted. He smirked, smiled, a genuine one this time. "I'd argue it's the best way." And just like that, Delilah found herself sitting across from a man she had just saved from a disaster date, entirely unaware that she was dining with one of the wealthiest CEOs in the city. Delilah hadn't planned on sitting down with a stranger that evening, but there she was, sharing a meal with Callum as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The moment she sat down, something shifted between them. The awkwardness from his previous date had vanished, replaced by an easy, unexpected rhythm. "So," she mused, resting her chin on her palm, "what's your deal, Callum?" "You don't seem like the kind of guy who needs blind dates," he exhaled, swirling the glass of wine the waiter had just placed in front of him. "It wasn't my idea," he admitted. "A friend insisted, said I needed to put myself out there." Delilah arched a brow. "And do you?" His gaze flicked to hers, something unreadable in his expression. "Apparently." There was a weight behind his words, but she didn't push. Instead, she leaned back and studied him. He carried himself with an air of quiet confidence, but there was something else there too, something guarded. "Well, if it makes you feel any better, I think she was more interested in your 5-year plan than you as a person," she teased. For the first time that evening, his laughter was genuine, rich and deep. "I noticed." The conversation flowed effortlessly after that. He asked about her job, and she told him how she'd been working at the bistro for a couple of years, saving up for something bigger. When he pressed for details, she hesitated. "I've always wanted to start my own bakery," she admitted. "Something small, nothing fancy, just a place where people can come in, grab something sweet, and feel at home." There was a beat of silence before Callum spoke. "That's a good dream," she shrugged. "It's not easy, though. Rent in this city is ridiculous, but one day." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense in a way that made her shift in her seat. "I have no doubt you'll make it happen." His certainty startled her. Most people patted her on the back, told her it was a nice thought, but Callum spoke as if her success was inevitable. Before she could respond, her manager gestured toward her from across the room. Reality came crashing back in. "I should probably get back to work before I get fired," she said, pushing back her chair. "Wouldn't want that." His lips quirked, but there was something in his eyes, an unspoken thought he didn't voice. As she turned to leave, he reached into his pocket and placed a crisp bill on the table. She barely caught a glimpse before shaking her head. "That's way too much for one meal." "Consider it a thank you for saving me," she hesitated, then gave him a small nod. "It was nice meeting you, Callum. The pleasure was mine." With that, she slipped back into the rhythm of her shift, but she felt his gaze on her long after she left his table. The next evening, Delilah was wiping down a counter when a familiar voice made her pause. "You know, I think this might be my new favorite restaurant." She turned, surprised to see Callum standing there, dressed in a dark button-down and slacks. "Back so soon?" He leaned against the counter, an easy confidence in his posture. "What can I say?" "The service was excellent," she laughed, shaking her head. "You mean the rescue?" "That too." She grabbed a notepad from the counter. "All right, what are you having tonight?" A slow smile spread across his face. "What do you recommend?" She rolled her eyes but played along. "Something different this time. How about the seafood pasta?" "Done." She jotted it down, then hesitated. "You don't strike me as the type to eat alone." "I usually don't," he admitted, "but I find myself enjoying the company here." Her stomach did a strange little flip, but she ignored it. "I'll put your order in." As she walked away, she couldn't help but wonder what exactly was Callum doing here. By the end of the week, he had dined at the bistro 3 more times. At first, she chalked it up to coincidence. Then, she realized it wasn't. "You do know there are other restaurants in the city, right?" she asked on the 4th evening, setting down his plate. "I do," he said, taking a sip of his drink, "but they don't have you." Her breath caught for a fraction of a second before she forced herself to play it cool. "Careful, Callum. Someone might think you're flirting." "Maybe I am." His words sent a jolt through her, unexpected and thrilling. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the bell above the entrance chimed. A well-dressed man strode in, his gaze scanning the room before landing on Callum. "There you are. I've been trying to reach you all day." Callum's expression shifted, his previously relaxed demeanor tightening slightly. "I've been busy." The newcomer gave Delilah a once-over before turning back to Callum. "The investors need an answer by tomorrow morning." "I told them you'd be available." She frowned, piecing together the interaction. "Investors? That wasn't exactly casual dinner conversation." Callum sighed, standing. "Give me a second." He turned to Delilah, his expression unreadable. "I might have to cut this visit short." She forced a smile. "No worries. You probably have some 5-year plans to work on." Something flickered across his face, an emotion she couldn't place. Then he nodded and followed the other man outside. As the door swung shut behind them, Delilah couldn't shake the feeling that Callum wasn't who she had assumed he was. Delilah had always prided herself on being good at reading people. It was a skill that came with working in a restaurant, picking up on the little things, the way someone glanced at their watch when they were impatient, the way a couple leaned in closer when they were truly engaged in conversation. But Callum, he was a puzzle she couldn't quite figure out. After his abrupt departure the night before, she had expected him to disappear, to return to whatever world he belonged to. Instead, he showed up again 2 nights later, slipping into his usual seat at the bistro. This time, though, there was something different about him. She approached his table, setting down a glass of water before raising an eyebrow. "Back again," he exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. "I needed a break." She studied him for a moment, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed lightly against the table. He looked tired, as if something had been weighing on him. Deciding to keep things light, she reached for her notepad. "All right, what'll it be tonight? Or are we sticking to the Delilah picks my meal tradition?" For the first time that evening, his lips curved in amusement. "I trust your judgment." She tapped the pen against her chin, pretending to think. "Something comforting, then. You look like you could use it." His gaze flickered with something unreadable before he nodded. "I'll take your recommendation." As she walked back to the kitchen, she couldn't help but wonder what had put that look in his eyes. The night moved at its usual rhythm, but Delilah found herself glancing toward Callum's table more often than she cared to admit. He wasn't like the other regulars, those who came in, ordered their food, and left without much thought. No, Callum lingered. By the time she finished her shift, he was still there, nursing the last of his drink as the restaurant emptied around him. On a whim, she grabbed 2 cups of coffee from the back and slid into the seat across from him. "You look like you could use this." He glanced at the cup, then at her, something softening in his expression. "You always this generous with your customers." "Only the ones who keep showing up uninvited," she teased, taking a sip. He chuckled, but it lacked the usual ease. She set her cup down, tilting her head. "All right, what's going on?" He hesitated, his fingers tightening around the handle of his mug. "Ever feel like you're being pulled in a direction you're not sure you want to go?" She frowned. "I think everyone feels that way at some point," he exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "There are expectations, responsibilities, and sometimes it feels like no matter what you do, you can't escape them." She studied him, piecing together the fragments of the conversation from the other night, investors, decisions. "You're not just some guy who eats dinner alone, are you?" she said quietly. Something flickered in his gaze. He didn't answer immediately, as if debating how much to reveal. "I run a company," he admitted finally. "A rather large one." It shouldn't have surprised her, not after the way he carried himself, but still it sent a jolt through her. "So you're important," she said, trying to keep her voice light. He huffed a quiet laugh. "Something like that." She traced the rim of her cup with her finger. "And you don't like it?" "I don't mind the work," he said, "but sometimes I wonder if it was ever really my choice." There was something deeply human in the way he said it, something vulnerable. She hesitated before speaking. "Maybe you just need a reminder of why you're doing it." His gaze locked onto hers, something shifting in his expression. "And what about you? What keeps you going?" "My dream," she said simply. "Even if it's far away, it's mine." He was quiet for a long moment before he nodded. Something unspoken passed between them then, a shared understanding. And just like that, Callum wasn't just the mysterious man who kept showing up at her restaurant. He was something more. Delilah had never been the kind of person who let herself get swept up in something uncertain. She liked stability, knowing where she stood. But with Callum, everything felt like standing at the edge of something vast and unknown, thrilling and terrifying all at once. The night after their quiet conversation over coffee, she hadn't expected to see him again so soon. Yet there he was, waiting outside the bistro just as she was locking up. "You're persistent," she noted, gripping her jacket tighter against the crisp night air. He stood beside a sleek black car, his presence commanding without effort. "I figured it was my turn to walk you somewhere." She hesitated, then tilted her head. "And where exactly are we going?" "That depends. Do you trust me?" Something about the way he asked it sent a shiver up her spine, not from fear, but from the weight of the question. Against all logic, she found herself nodding. A driver opened the door for her, and before she could second-guess her decision, she slid inside. Callum followed, the space between them charged with an energy she couldn't define. The city blurred past as they drove, the tension between them thick and unspoken. She didn't ask where they were going, and he didn't offer. Instead, he watched her, as if waiting for her to say she'd changed her mind. She didn't. The car pulled up to a building that soared into the sky, its glass exterior reflecting the city lights. A doorman greeted them by name well, Callum's name, and she barely had time to process where they were before they stepped into a private elevator. "You live here?" she asked, glancing at him as the doors slid shut. "For now," The vague answer didn't bother her as much as it should have. There were other questions she wanted to ask, but the weight of the moment silenced them. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped into a space that could only be described as breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glittering skyline. The furniture was modern, refined, yet the space didn't feel cold. It felt lived in, as if every detail had been chosen with care. She turned to him, folding her arms. "All right, I'm impressed, but why bring me here?" He studied her, something unreadable in his expression. "Because I wanted you to see my world," she frowned. "I know you don't," he interrupted gently. "That's why I wanted to." Something in his voice made her heart stutter. He wasn't showing off, he wasn't trying to overwhelm her, he simply wanted her to see him, all of him. Delilah stepped closer, searching his face. "You don't have to prove anything to me, Callum." A shadow passed through his gaze. "I know, but I've spent so much of my life surrounded by people who only see one side of me. I wanted you to know the whole truth before." She waited, but he didn't finish the sentence. Before what? The air between them grew heavier, charged with something neither of them were willing to name just yet. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers. "Stay for a while." It wasn't a demand, it wasn't even a request, it was an invitation, one she couldn't refuse. They spent the next hour in easy conversation, sitting on the plush couch overlooking the city. He told her about the pressures of his position, the expectations that had been placed on him since he was young. She shared more of her dreams, her fears about taking that first leap toward something bigger. And then, as the night deepened, silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but charged. She could feel his eyes on her, the weight of his gaze setting her skin ablaze. "Delilah," he murmured, her name like a whisper of something inevitable. She looked up, heart hammering, and then he kissed her. It wasn't rushed, wasn't hesitant, it was deliberate, slow, like he had been waiting for this moment just as much as she had. His hand slid to her jaw, tilting her face toward him, deepening the connection. By the time they pulled apart, breathless, she knew there was no going back. She had stepped off the edge, and she wasn't afraid of falling. The morning after their kiss, Delilah woke up with a feeling she couldn't quite name. It wasn't regret, far from it. But there was something about the way Callum had looked at her, the way his hands had held her as if she were something precious, that left her breathless even now. She had stayed at his penthouse longer than she should have, talking, laughing, stealing glances that spoke louder than words. But before things could go any further, she had whispered that she needed to leave, and Callum, ever the gentleman, had walked her to the car without protest. Now, as she tied her apron at the bistro, she wondered if she'd see him again tonight. She didn't have to wonder for long. The late afternoon lull had just settled in when the restaurant door swung open, and there he was. But this time, he wasn't alone. A sharp-dressed woman strode in beside him, her heels clicking against the tiled floor with practiced precision. She was effortlessly elegant, her dark hair twisted into an impeccable chignon, her tailored coat fitting her perfectly. The familiarity with which she moved beside Callum made something in Delilah's stomach tighten. She forced a polite smile as she approached their table. "Back again." Callum's eyes met hers, something unreadable flickering in them before he spoke. "I had a meeting nearby. Thought I'd stop in." The woman glanced at Delilah, then at Callum, before tilting her head ever so slightly. "You didn't mention this place before." Callum's jaw tensed just slightly, barely noticeable, but Delilah caught it. "I don't tell you everything, Vanessa," he said smoothly, his voice even. "Vanessa." Delilah kept her expression neutral as she pulled out her notepad. "What can I get for you?" Vanessa ordered without hesitation, her words clipped and efficient. Callum, however, barely looked at the menu. "I'll have whatever Delilah recommends," he said, his gaze lingering on her a second longer than necessary. Vanessa's eyes flickered between them, and Delilah had the distinct feeling that the woman was assessing her. She put in their orders and busied herself with other customers, but she couldn't help but notice the way Vanessa leaned in when she spoke to Callum, the way her manicured fingers occasionally brushed his sleeve. By the time she returned with their meals, she was determined to remain professional, unaffected. But as she set Callum's plate in front of him, Vanessa spoke. So, she mused, tapping her fork against the table, how exactly do you and Callum know each other? Delilah met Callum's gaze for half a second before answering. He's a regular. Callum's lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but Vanessa hummed in response. A regular, she repeated, as though tasting the words. Interesting. The conversation shifted after that, moving away from her and into business talk, mergers, negotiations, investment strategies. It was a world Delilah had no part in, a world she wasn't sure she wanted to step into. And yet, Callum kept looking at her small glances when Vanessa wasn't watching, fleeting moments of something unspoken. When they finished their meal, Vanessa stood first, adjusting the sleek strap of her purse. We should go. The investors won't wait forever. Callum hesitated, his fingers twitching against the edge of the table. Then, with a small nod, he stood. Before he left, he turned to Delilah. I'll see you soon. It wasn't a question. And despite everything, despite the uncertainty, despite Vanessa, Delilah knew she wanted to believe him. 2 nights passed before she saw him again. This time, it wasn't at the bistro. She had just stepped out of the grocery store, her bag tucked under her arm, when a familiar black car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, revealing Callum in the driver's seat. You walk home alone at this hour? He asked, arching a brow. Delilah huffed a laugh. Not all of us have private drivers and cars that probably cost more than my entire apartment building. He didn't smile. Instead, he reached over, unlocking the passenger door. Get in. She hesitated. I'll drop you off, he added, his voice softer now. No expectations. Just let me make sure you get home safe. The sincerity in his tone disarmed her. With a sigh, she slid into the seat, placing her bag on her lap. They drove in silence for a moment, the hum of the city filling the spaces between them. Then, quietly, he spoke. I should have explained. Delilah turned to him. About Vanessa, he nodded, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. She's an associate, nothing more. Delilah exhaled slowly, watching the city lights blur past them. She certainly didn't act like it. Callum's jaw tightened. She thinks she knows what's best for me, but she doesn't. Delilah studied him. And what is best for you, Callum? He pulled up in front of her building and put the car in park before turning to face her fully. You, he said simply. The air between them crackled. Callum, I don't expect an answer now, he interrupted gently, but I need you to know that this, whatever this is between us, it's real for me. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She had spent so much of her life guarding herself, avoiding risks that might leave her hurt. But Callum wasn't just a risk. He was something more, something dangerous in the best possible way. Before she could overthink it, she leaned forward and kissed him. This time, it wasn't slow, wasn't tentative. It was a promise. As she pulled away, she saw the way his breathing had shifted, the faint astonishment in his eyes. I'll see you soon, she murmured, echoing his own words from days before. And then, before she could second-guess herself, she stepped out of the car and disappeared into the building. Callum didn't leave right away. He sat there, gripping the steering wheel, a slow realization settling over him. This woman, this stubborn, fiercely independent woman, had just turned his entire world upside down. And for the first time in years, he didn't mind one bit. Callum couldn't focus on anything the next day. Meetings blurred together, emails went unanswered, and for the first time in years, he found himself staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, thinking about nothing but Delilah. The memory of her kiss still lingered, the feel of her lips, the way she had looked at him just before she pulled away. It had changed everything. He had spent his entire life following a carefully laid-out path, one paved with expectations, obligations, and responsibilities he had never fully questioned. But now, for the first time, he wanted something simply because it made him feel alive, and that something was her. That evening, he didn't go straight home. Instead, he arrived at the bistro just before closing, stepping inside as the last few customers trickled out. Delilah turned at the sound of the door, her eyes widening slightly when she saw him. He could tell she hadn't expected him so soon, but she didn't look displeased. She wiped her hands on a cloth before walking toward him, her expression unreadable. You're making a habit of showing up unannounced. He took a step closer, his voice quieter than usual. Would you rather I didn't? She didn't answer right away, but the corner of her lips lifted ever so slightly. "I haven't decided yet." Callum exhaled, something loosening in his chest at her teasing tone. They were still them, no matter what had shifted between them. "I want to take you somewhere," he said after a moment. She arched a brow. "Somewhere," he nodded. "Somewhere that isn't here, somewhere that's just ours." She studied him, her fingers tightening around the cloth she still held. He could see the hesitation in her eyes, not because she didn't want to go, but because this was new, unfamiliar territory. But then she nodded. 10 minutes later, she was sliding into his car once more, the city stretching out before them as he drove. They left the bright lights behind, the noise fading as they entered quieter streets. Eventually, he pulled up to a secluded spot overlooking the water. The view was breathtaking, the city's skyline reflecting off the gentle waves, distant but still within reach. Delilah stepped out of the car, wrapping her arms around herself as she took in the sight. "This is beautiful." Callum leaned against the hood of the car, watching her instead of the view. "I come here when I need to think." She turned to face him, curiosity flickering in her gaze. "And what are you thinking about now?" He hesitated only for a moment before answering. "You." Her breath hitched slightly, and for once she didn't have a teasing response. Callum pushed off the car and took a step toward her. "I don't want to play games, Delilah. I don't want to pretend this is something casual when it's not." She swallowed hard, but she didn't look away. "I know this isn't easy," he continued, his voice softer now. "You have your life, your dreams, and I have mine. But I don't see a reason why they can't exist together." She let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "You make it sound so simple." "Because it is," he said, "or at least it could be if we let it." Delilah looked out at the water again, as if searching for an answer in the rippling waves. Then she exhaled, turning back to him. "I'm scared," she admitted finally, "not because of you, but because this is bigger than anything I've ever let myself want before." Callum stepped closer, closing the space between them. "Then let me show you that it's worth it." The silence between them stretched, heavy with something neither of them could deny anymore, and then she reached for his hand. That was all the answer he needed. Months passed and everything changed. Delilah's world expanded in ways she had never expected. Callum didn't just fit into her life, he became part of it, seamlessly, effortlessly. He never tried to change her, never asked her to be anything other than exactly who she was. And in return, she saw sides of him that no one else did. The part of him that craved something real, something outside of boardrooms and business meetings. The part of him that softened when he watched her bake, that relaxed when they spent nights wrapped up in quiet conversations instead of lavish events. He supported her dream without hesitation, helping her navigate the complexities of opening her own bakery. Not because he wanted to control it, but because he believed in her even when she doubted herself. And then, one evening, everything shifted again. She had just finished locking up her newly opened bakery when she turned to find Callum waiting outside. But this time, he wasn't just standing there, he was holding a small velvet box. Her heart stopped. Callum exhaled, stepping closer. "I never knew what I was missing until I met you," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "You changed everything, Delilah, and I don't want a life that doesn't have you in it." Her hands trembled as he lowered himself to one knee. "Marry me." Tears pricked at her eyes, but she didn't hesitate this time. "Yes." Callum slipped the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms, holding her as if he never intended to let go, and he never would. The wedding was everything Delilah had never let herself dream of: intimate, breathtaking, filled with nothing but love. As she stood at the altar, looking up at the man who had once been a mystery but was now her entire world, she realized something. Love wasn't about losing yourself. It wasn't about choosing between who you were and who someone else wanted you to be. It was about finding the one person who saw all of you and still wanted more. And as Callum leaned in, pressing his lips to hers in front of everyone they loved, she knew without a doubt. She had found that person, and she would never let him go.